Good afternoon, welcome to this video. I'm currently standing in the middle of a field in Piddlehinton of all places, which is a small village, if you can even call it a village, in Dorset. It's a county in England, Dorset. I haven't been here before, but it's really quite beautiful. It is, however, very isolated from the rest of the world, as in, if you don't have a car, you can't really do much here. You can't really go shopping, or it's pretty annoying, but oh well, I've been managing to deal with that. Anyway, I'm here, because you might be wondering why the fuck is called middle of the field, Piddlehinton. I'm here because I'm doing a 2-week guitar building course at Crimson Guitars, which some of you may know from their own YouTube channel, and they have an Instagram page as well. They're really big, which is in Piddlehinton, which is a few miles down the road. And I figured I would reshoot this intro. I did it before I left Brighton, but yeah, I figured I would reshoot it in this field. It's kind of cool. And this is my second to last day here. Tomorrow I'll be finishing the guitar. It's a Sunday now. So I basically filmed kind of the progress and all the steps and everything I've done with a lot of help to kind of create the guitar that I've created. And I haven't really done a lot of talking or a lot of kind of cinematic shooting and bits and B-roll filming, because I've been pretty preoccupied with actually building the thing, because it's kind of hard if you haven't done it before and you're operating big machines and it's very loud. It's kind of awkward to talk to people in front of the camera anyway, if you're standing there behind a workbench with loads of people around you. So yeah, I'm just gonna kind of narrate this video, like do post-production kind of voiceover, but I'll shut up now, and I hope you enjoy the video. Cheers. So I just arrived at the Piddle Inn, which is a pub slash bed and breakfast place, which is where I'll be staying the coming 2 weeks. So I'm pretty tired and I'm not gonna film or say anything else today. I didn't film much during the journey because I had all this stuff with me and the camera's in the big bag and it's hard to get out and it's just awkward and blah blah blah. So I'll start filming things tomorrow, I guess, and yeah. Check it tomorrow. So on day one, I was shown around the place and introduced to everyone at Crimson, including Ben, who I obviously knew from the videos and stuff, so that was really cool. Here you can see kind of the main student room with all the machines we used, and then on the left was an even bigger room, which had even bigger machines, which was where the professionals were at work most of the time. I was in there a few times, but that was mostly reserved for the pros. Here's a shot of all the raw materials. There was some spalted ash for the top, pine for the body, and then zirconia for the fretboard, that last bit of wood I bought on eBay. The pine is actually 300 to 400 years old, and it used to be part of a big support beam in my grandparents' farmhouse, which they removed from the house in the late 80s, early 90s I believe, during renovations, and I basically cut off a chunk of that bigger beam like 5-6 years ago, and I'd always wanted to do something with that wood. I mean, I knew I wanted to build a guitar out of it, but I never really got the opportunity to do that, which is why I was very excited to finally use it. The wood did present some difficulties and problems because there were some old square nails inside of it, and obviously you don't really want to cut through those with a saw that's meant for cutting wood. So we just ended up carefully cutting a corner off so we could see how deep the nails were inside of the wood. And we also planed one side of the somewhat toxic lead paint off with the machine so we could see if the other side was actually nail free, which it was, which was, a nice surprise. So that meant we could essentially cut one side off and leave the nails on the side they were on without having to cut into them. And we managed to get enough wood out of the piece I brought that way. So yeah, after that I basically planed the sides of the planks we made so they would fit together nicely, and then we glued them together with 2 bits of veneer in between because I thought that would look cool. Essentially we did the same with the neck. We just planed it and cut it and stuff and then glued it together, and that was day one really. That's what I did. So on day 2, I actually forgot to bring my camera, which sucked, but I did film some stuff just using my phone. Essentially what I did was I took the clamps of the body blank and also the neck. Then I measured the neck and the body, and I drew some center lines and stuff, after which I kind of crudely cut out the general kind of shape of the neck, and then I routed the neck, and I also routed a channel for the truss rod. And at the end of the day, I also kind of leveled the fretboard, so it was prepared for the next day to cut fret slots and to join it together with the neck. I will say, although this experience has been very positive, that the weather has been very, very wet, and I guess shitty, at least if you're cycling every day. So, yeah, loads of puddles. And this is the best part of the road. Later on, it's more like a dirt road with loads of holes and stuff, so it gets even worse. But, yeah. So I started that day by cutting the fret slots, using this kind of circular saw thing. I had stuck the fretboard to this kind of template ruler which had the right scale length on it and notches, so you kind of knew where to cut. After I did that, I cut the excess bit of wood off at the top, and after that I glued the wings to the headstock so there would be enough room for the tuners later on. It's not wide enough without the wings. So after I finished doing that, I proceeded by gluing the fretboard to the neck, now that the channel was routed and the truss rod was in, because I did it the day before. And yeah, I just glued it, clamped all the clamps on, and as that was drying, I moved on to the body blank, which still had some kind of veneer sticking out. So I firstly scraped off most of the excess veneer, and then I used this kind of conveyor belt Domino's pizza sander machine to level it and make it smooth and straight. After which I could finally draw on the body shape using the template, and then I cut it out using the bandsaw, kind of crudely again, because you kind of do the final proper shape using the router and the template later on. So when that was done, the neck was kind of dry, so I took it out of the clamps, after which I cut off most of the excess fretboard material, and then I planed the wings down so they would be level with the rest of the headstock. I then took the neck to the bandsaw and I cut off the excess wing material, and after I did that, I was finally able to route the kind of general shape and the headstock shape using the routing table again. So when that was done, I drew on the kind of neck shape / profile and the different depths it would have at different fret markers, after which Chris actually cut it out because it's quite hard and also dangerous with regards to if you mess it up, it might actually ruin the whole neck altogether, which I was fine with. Next time I'll try it myself. When that was done, I went back to the routing table once more to then route the channels for the binding on each side of the neck. And because you don't want to mess up the heel, which has to sit in the pocket later perfectly, you kind of hand plane the excess material off there instead of using the router, which you can see me doing here. At that point the day was almost over, so I just glued the top together and I went home. So the next morning the spalted ash top had dried, so I put the template on top of it and traced it, after which I could cut out the general shape again. After I did that, I stabilized some cracks to prevent any possible tear outs later by using some super glue and just kind of filling those. And then I moved on to the binding of the neck, which didn't have any binding yet, so I glued that on with loads of bits of tape. So after that I moved on to shaping the neck with what they call a Japanese saw, I believe. It's a kind of rasp thing. So you just draw some lines on the neck and you kind of rasp the wood in between those lines, and then you end up with like a kind of rounded neck, I guess, if you have several lines and you keep taking the corner off. I kind of went for a chunky 58 Les Paul C-shaped neck because I'm quite a fan of that kind of shape. And that took me most of the day. I kind of sanded it to make it smooth afterwards, and that was day 4 done. So on day 5, I started out by radiusing the fretboard, seeing that the neck was now mostly done. After I did that, I used one of the cutoffs from the spalted ash top to create a veneer, which I firstly had to cut out, and then I had to make it thin using the belt sander, I think it's called. And then I cut the kind of thin veneer with the bandsaw, and I glued it onto the neck using the kind of skewer barbecue stick method, so you can kind of make sure it always falls into the right place. And after I did that, I used a spindle sander to kind of take the edges off for the most part. And then I basically did the same with the body. I used the same skewer stick method again, so you make sure it falls into the right spots when you glue it. And then I clamped loads of clamps onto it with some help from Tom. And after I finished that, the day was basically over, so I went home again. So after a weekend of walking through many fields, I arrived back at Crimson on day 6 in the morning. It was a Monday again, so start of a new week. That day I basically routed the main shape and the binding channel and everything for the body, which was quite exciting because it really kind of started to take shape. It kind of started looking like a real guitar body, like the kind of final thing in a sense. So I thought it was pretty exciting. So after I finished that, I moved on to the pillar drill, which I used to basically kind of pre-drill some of the holes for the cavities, so they would be easier to route out later on. And who doesn't love some good slow-mo shots of drilling, because that's always very satisfying, so here you go. So after that, I moved on to the routing of the cavities using templates again. The last thing I did that day was creating the right break angle for the neck, which is achieved by using the thickness sander and a block under the body. So you have to essentially just calculate what the height needs to be to create the right angle, and then you just put it through the machine like that. So on day 7, I mostly focused on creating the neck pocket, which you essentially do by temporarily clamping the neck onto the body in the right spot by matching the center line of the neck and the center line of the body, so they match and they're in line. And then you use straight, thin, flat bits of wood to tightly secure against the neck and the body, so you have a perfect fit. And then you essentially use that as your routing template. Again, firstly, you always drill out the material, or at least most of the material that's there, so working with the router is easier. Before I forget, I also routed and pre-drilled the cavities for the pickups on that same day. After that, I actually drilled some holes for the bridge anchors and for the strings to go through, which I'll honestly admit I messed up with regards to aligning the holes with the drill and stuff. So to cover that up, I put a bit of Ziricotti into the body there, which actually turned out to be a pretty nice feature. And I then re-drilled the holes, this time perfectly in line. So that's what I did. So on the morning of day 8, I worked on my inlay, which took me, I think, 2-3 hours. It was quite hard to do, very finicky, but it was quite enjoyable as well at the same time. For some reason, it's quite relaxing. And so after I did that, I made some measurements to get the positioning right, and then using a scalpel and like this tiny chisel, I think it's called, I basically created like a little pocket, which I then glued it into. And then I filled the kind of cracks with ebony dust and filed and sanded it down so it was flush with the fretboard. In order to ensure the frets would fit perfectly and sit well, I then cleared the fret slots. Then I was able to start cutting the frets, and then I also had to cut the barb and the tang off, seeing I had binding. And of course you want it to sit on top of the binding and not come through, because that would look pretty bad. So that same day I managed to glue all the frets in, and after that it was time to go home for me and get some rest. So I started out day 9 by cutting off all the fret ends which were still sticking out, and I then used a file to really get it down and flush with the neck and the binding. So using a marker, you essentially mark the frets and then use a leveling beam to level them, so you can see where the high and the low spots are, and where you need to level some more. Then I softened slash kind of angled the ends using the same leveling beam. After that, I moved on to crowning using various tools like little files and things, little shields to put over the frets so you get the top and the sides and the ends just right shape-wise. Which takes a long time. I would actually dare to say that the fretwork is probably the most time-consuming part of the build. As one stage at least, because obviously other things can add up as well. So when that was done, I moved on to sanding, for which I use a floppy bit of folded sanding paper, and you progressively move up to higher, finer grits as you go along. Then after that, I scraped the fretboard clean from any potential superglue residue from the gluing, and then I taped the neck and then crisp buffed it, because this is pretty dangerous as the neck can sometimes fly off into the ceiling or into the ground, which would obviously break and ruin it, so yeah, that's one of the few things you're not allowed to do. When that was done, I took the tape off and I oiled the fretboard, which then really came to life, which looked really cool. And then finally, the last thing I did that day was opening up the truss rod access hole slash cavity, which I had covered up with the veneer earlier. And then the next morning, with the exception of final sanding, I completed the neck by creating the side dots from some aluminium tubing. And then you just use super glue, which seems to be the magical luthier sauce that you use for most things, to secure the dots. And you cut it off with a little saw and then just file and scrape and sand the dots so they're smooth, like with basically everything else. So now that the neck was basically fully done, I started to carve the top, which you can see me doing here. I won't lie, this was very difficult, and I kind of did one side, which Tom then had to correct, and then he did the other side because I just didn't want to ruin the top. And in particular, because this was a spalter top, it seemed to be quite soft in certain places, so the blade of the angle grinder would kind of pierce through deeper in certain areas, which is quite difficult. The same goes for the orbital sander, so yeah, that was quite a difficult thing to do. After that, it was time to put the binding on. I had to use a heat gun to get the corners to properly go round the shape without any cracks and holes, which was quite difficult. And then I used super glue and loads of tape to keep it in place, and I just moved along the edge until the binding was totally glued. After that, I removed all of the tape I had literally just put on a few seconds ago, because super glue dries really fast. And I then sanded the sides and the bindings, so everything was smooth and flush and nice and fluffy and amazing, like a unicorn fairy tale land. When that was done, I moved on to creating the belly carve, which I usually call the comfortality carve, because comfortality is not really a word, but to me it is, because I like it. Comfortality is just a great word. In hindsight, this would have been easier to do if I had done it before carving the top, but I forgot about it, so I did it after. So you might be thinking, wait, did it say day 11? Yes, that is correct. I ended up having to stay a few extra days because I didn't finish in time, which is just the way things went, which I'm fine with. So day 11, I had to drill some holes, and I also drilled some tunnels for the wiring and the electronics. And then I basically moved on to final sanding, which was now still a bit easier, so the neck wasn't glued into the body yet. I also tried to cut the plates for the control cavities and stuff, which was quite hard to do with the scroll saw, so I actually ended up buying these aluminium jigsaw blades, which was a lot easier. And then using different sanding machines, I created the perfect shape, and then they fitted perfectly into the control cavities. Then the time was finally upon me to glue in the neck and attach the neck to the body, which was quite cool because it was really coming together now, which was quite exciting. You can see Chris helping me here with this. I didn't film the following, but I actually also carved the kind of neck joint area to create a carve that is similar to a Les Paul access, not as exaggerated, just so it's easier to access the higher frets. So because I was very much behind on schedule, having to stay a few extra days. I didn't actually film that much because I was just preoccupied with actually finishing the guitar and yeah, just going home as soon as I could. I basically did a lot of final sanding, which didn't film, and then as you can see here, I wrapped up the neck using tape, and then it was ready for finishing, which Chris did. This is also one of the few things that you're not allowed to do yourself, which I was fine with because I have actually finished a few guitars myself before using just spray paint lacquer, and it is very difficult in my opinion. As the lacquer was hardening and drying, I started to work on the wiring, which I was partially able to complete before putting it into the body, as obviously the pickups and some other things you can only connect once everything's in the body. By that time, the one-tone burst had dried, so it was ready for a flash coat of clear gloss, which you can see Chris applying here. After which it had to dry for a bit longer, and then it was finally done and it was ready for hardware installation, which again I didn't film much of. Here you can see me installing the coins and some of the other hardware. I put some tape over the pickups because I hadn't secured the pickup rings yet, and I was doing the wiring and stuff, so I didn't want it to fall out and damage the top. Here you can see me doing some of the final wiring and stringing the guitar as well. Hello there, thank you for making this far into the video. As I probably mentioned in the voiceover earlier, I didn't film a lot during my last few days at Crimson because I was kind of pressed for time and there were some problems. And yeah, basically I just didn't film much. I actually had to stay a few extra days because I didn't finish in time. But that was all fine because, I finished it in the end, so I'm pretty pleased with the results. Because I didn't film much and I didn't really go through what the kind of hardware kind of configuration was, I figured I would film that now and talk about it and show you some of the sounds. So the theme is kind of aluminium chrome, just silver hardware essentially. The only thing that's still missing currently are the back plates, the control covers, which I made, as you probably saw just now in the video. It's just they're getting anodized, so it's like this process which makes aluminium look kind of matte. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but yeah, so that's currently being done by the place that's doing it, so I'm just waiting for those to arrive. But apart from that, it's totally done. I've got these kind of red special style knobs here. I've got a little 3A switch. There's a piezo Fishman tunematic bridge, so you can have just the piezo acoustic sound or blend with the pickups or have just the pickups. Then the pickups have like push-pulls to split the coils. And there's two tone caps, so you can have like a warmer kind of tone when it's rolled down, or like a more kind of growly, fuzzy rolled down tone sound. And this is just a master for the piezo. So there's two volumes and one master tone. Just regular 3A switch, two mules, which are like PAF style pickups made by Bare Knuckle in the UK as well. They have a really cool logo. It's like this kind of very British guy boxing, but like with his hands this way instead of this way. I don't know if people box this way these days or this way. I've never really been into like fighting sports and stuff, but yeah, their logo is cool, but that doesn't really matter. So and I've got Grover locking tuners and a little threshold cover that says Berry Limestone, which is kind of cool, or limestone, not Berry Limestone, and Schaller, Scaler, whatever they're called, locking tuners, not locking tuners, sorry, I mean locking strap buttons, so it doesn't just drop to the ground randomly, which is usually a good thing. So yeah, overall I'm pretty pleased with the results. It sounds good, it plays well, it sounds a lot different than my other Les Paul, and it's kind of funny actually that the people at Crimson don't really subscribe to the whole Tonewood thing, but to me it sounds a lot different. Maybe it's partially because of the active little PCB board which is in there in the battery for the piezo bridge, because although this is not active at all, the signal is still flowing through that little like chip to the output jack, so maybe that contributes to the fact that it sounds very kind of bright and ashy and I guess piney, because the ash top and the pine body probably make it sound bright if it's the wood, but I think it's the wood. But actually, I just remembered a few days ago I asked Pete Thorne in a live stream.
What is my opinion on Tonewood? Just finished a guitar course at Crimson in the UK and was surprised to hear they think wood doesn't really influence tone, only sustain for electrics, says Fully Den Tomb. I disagree with that. My opinion is always that I can hear the differences in wood.
But regardless, it sounds great. It's kind of cool that it sounds different than the Les Paul I have now, because that means I won't be substituting it for it, but rather using it in different situations, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, and I could never just, I've built such a great thing without having all the help and expertise and knowledge around and things, there and machines. Because if I would have done this alone, like my first guitar, I'm sure I would have, ended up with something resembling a guitar, but it wouldn't have been as good looking and playing. So I'll shut up now. I'll give you kind of an oversight of the different sounds. I won't go through everything, but I'll give you a few different kind of configurations. I think that was it. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or anything else, just comment down below and follow me on Instagram at Barry Limestone Official, and follow me or like me on Facebook. It's also just Barry Limestone, which would be cool if you want to, and subscribe and stuff, which I think just is a thing you have to say as a YouTuber, which I guess I'm not really, but I do some videos from time to time, so I guess I will say now, please subscribe. But anyway, I'm really chuffed with the end result. I want to thank Chris and Tom in particular, who were the two teachers at Crimson, for all their help and a lot of patience as well, because I don't have a lot of experience and I'm sure I was a pain to deal with at times, but oh well. The experience was just great overall, and yeah, if there's anything I would say feedback wise, would be that maybe there's only two teachers, and at times there are a lot of students who are like me, who haven't done anything before, which means they all have a lot of questions and they're waiting for their next kind of set of instructions, and that means at times you're waiting around a bit, and I guess it adds up over 2 weeks when you have to wait like 5-10 minutes every time, adds up to a few hours. So I mean, it's just a bit annoying. It's no one's fault. There's nothing to do with Tom or Chris or their expertise. It's just if they put like one or two extra teachers in the room, that would be helpful. And also I think they should make like a workbook with general instructions and maybe images and a kind of guide as to how to, I don't know, measure things and draw lines and that kind of stuff, so at least you can kind of get going on the next step when you're waiting for help. And I think a workbook would sell well in their web shop anyway. If they made like a PDF just workbook or guitar building book for like a tenner, I bet loads of people would download it. But oh well. Yeah, it's just one little bit of feedback, but it was really 99% like just positive and great. And if you think of doing it, it's really well worth it. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.